Rainforest Cafe is a memorable dining experience that you are not going to find anywhere else. In my opinion, it does a pretty good job at creating a fun, indoor rainforest environment, and that is not easy to do. I'm talking about artificial rocks and trees all over the place, large animatronic animals, sounds of the rainforest playing over speakers, and every 20 minutes or so they start flashing the lights and playing thunder to simulate a rainstorm. I think it's a lot of fun anyway, for children and adults, especially today, because a lot of adults have great memories of going there when they were a child in the 1990s. You might remember getting the sparkling volcano dessert with the actual sparkler on the top, or maybe one of the other popular dishes like the Rasta pasta. Back then, it was like an exciting new concept that everyone was talking about. It was winning awards within the industry, it was one of those stocks that investors were talking about, and it became a destination for families across the country. However, by the end of that decade, things were already looking bad, and it's reflected in their stock price. See, in 1995, the company had its initial public offering, just months after opening its first location, where it sold stock for about $6 per share. In 1996, it reached an all-time high at $25 per share, giving investors a 400% return within about a year and a half. And if those investors had held on to the stock, they would have lost most of their money, because by 2000, the price of it had dropped to about $2 per share. It stood out to me when I read a Los Angeles Times article from 2000 that described Rainforest Cafe as a troubled theme restaurant and called it a cash-needy company. That doesn't sound good, and I wouldn't say things have gone much better since. Rainforest cafes do still exist today in a bit of a different form, but there are about half as many as there used to be, with some of the more notable locations shutting down, like the one in downtown Disney in Anaheim that closed in 2018. In this video, I am excited to go into more detail about this unique restaurant while outlining what I believe to be 5 of the biggest reasons behind its decline, starting off with high cost. And there are a few different parts to this one, so let me start back at the beginning with the man who had the original idea for the restaurant, Steven Schuessler, who quite possibly is the most eccentric person that I've talked about on this channel. Famously, he once dressed up as Superman and delivered himself in a large crate as an attempt to make himself stand out to the general manager at a radio station where he was trying to get a sales job, showing his determination and tendency to think outside the box. Well, not literally in this case, but figuratively. Throughout the 1980s, he was the head of a small chain of 1950s themed restaurants slash nightclubs called Jukebox Saturday Night that shut down in 1991. From there, this part almost sounds made up, but I promise it is true, he spent the next 3 years transforming his home into a rainforest. Again, displaying those same characteristics. He wanted to start a rainforest themed restaurant and figured that the best way to find investors for it was to show them a prototype. But I think you might agree that he went a little bit overboard with that prototype. There were dozens of birds flying around, 2 large tortoises, a baboon walking around freely, and a greenhouse filled with butterflies. He utilized 3,700 extension cords to power various lighting setups, sound systems, and fog machines, using so much electricity that the DEA came to his door suspecting that he must have been using all that power to grow drugs. His neighbors truly thought that he was losing his mind, and he had spent all of his life savings on it. It took almost $400,000 just to create the prototype to hopefully find an investor who could help pay for the actual restaurant. Well, he finally did find an investor named Lyle Berman. He was involved in the casino industry and agreed to invest $1.2 million to build that first Rainforest Cafe, and by the time it was ready to open, they were significantly over budget. You could understand where all the money is spent. Animatronic animals, elaborate sound systems, waterfalls, aquariums. They even had live birds in the restaurants back then that had to be trained and cared for. These are all costs, by the way, that most restaurants do not have to worry about, and when you are paying so much more than the others, it almost forces you to attract more customers and generate more revenue than the others. Part of their plan to do that was to locate their restaurants in high traffic areas, which also tend to cost more money with the leases, so you can see the high risk, high reward type approach that was involved here. That was really paying off at first. For that first restaurant, they conveniently decided to place it at the nearby Mall of America. It had opened only a couple years earlier as the biggest mall in the country. industry. From there, the company went on to open locations in casinos, theme parks, and various other tourist destinations. Early on, they were attracting more customers than they could handle, and their sales per location were among the highest in the industry. But those sales per location slowly started to fall, and without every restaurant being ridiculously busy all the time, it became difficult to make up for those abnormally high costs. Their net income took a noticeable dip, and that is going to lead me into the second reason on my list: repeat customers. Rainforest Cafe is one of many themed restaurants that emerged in the 1990s, maybe the most notable one being Planet Hollywood, who I might talk about more extensively in a separate video, but for now, I want to say that they were also struggling by the end of the decade, filing for bankruptcy in 1999. And a big reason behind the rapid rise and fall of these themed restaurants is that they have struggled to get customers to keep coming back. Look, the Rainforest theme is really cool, and unlike anything else, I have to give them credit for that, but it is kind of a novelty with diminishing returns. Each time you go there, it is a little more familiar and a little less impressive. I'm not saying that the food or the service is bad necessarily, but the environment is clearly the reason that most people are going there and willing to pay higher prices. When the Rainforest theme starts to lose its wonder after a few visits, people stop going there. They have even admitted the company's history indicates that a unit's revenues frequently decline during such units' subsequent years of operation, and they have reported various figures that suggest sales typically decline dramatically after a restaurant has been open for a while. Overall, what I'm trying to say here is that sales early on for themed restaurants in the 1990s suggested that they could be the next big thing in the industry, but sales reports in the following years revealed that customers were not returning like they had hoped, and it was unlikely to maintain that level for an extended period of time. The next reason on my list is poor branding. Now, I'm not saying that it has been the worst out there, but also not nearly as strong as I believe it needs to be, because themed restaurants are all about branding. The Hard Rock Cafe, for example, arguably the most successful themed restaurant today, and when I made a video about the reasons behind their success, I put branding as one of those reasons. I recommend watching that video if you want to hear more details about it, but they have established a cool enough brand for people to want to wear it on their shirts. Maybe you own one of them yourself, or at the very least have seen people wearing them, and I'm going to go ahead and guess that you have not seen nearly as many people wearing Rainforest Cafe shirts. And trust me, it is not from lack of effort. Almost all Rainforest Cafes have had a store attached to the restaurants going back to the very beginning. It's actually a great idea. Maybe more restaurants should do it because it occupies people while they're waiting for a table. The tagline is a wild place to shop and eat. See, they even put the word shop before eat, despite only around 20% of their sales coming from the store. In 1996, they introduced a group of animal characters called the Wild Bunch that were meant to be like the equivalent of Mickey Mouse and all those Disney characters. At the time, the senior vice president of retail said, "We have created 8 characters. There are Mickey, our Minnie, and our Bugs Bunny." They had plans to create books, cartoons, a movie centered around them, and he projected that 90% of their retail sales would soon be coming from character merchandise. Clearly, those were big expectations that I just do not think have been realized. My question for anybody watching this, including the biggest Rainforest Cafe fans, is do you know these characters? Like, I'm sure you've probably seen them before, but can you tell me their names or personality traits, because they have existed and have been mostly unchanged for almost 3 decades now, and I'm guessing that almost nobody can tell me about them in the same way that they could tell me about Mickey and the gang. They have made some respectable attempts when it comes to growing a strong brand, but I think most would agree that they have failed at building it into one of the strongest. The next reason on my list is going to be a quick one, but I feel like I should at least acknowledge that Rainforest Cafe can be considered outdated in a few different ways. Like I said in the beginning, a lot of adults today have memories of going there when they were younger, but not really all that much since, so those individuals might think of it as a 90s brand, that is when they were the most popular. Also, I keep going back to themed restaurants and how they turned out to be much more of a 90s fad, and to add even another layer to that, the rainforest was a much trendier topic back then. The restaurant probably would not have ever existed otherwise. There was this big movement to save the rainforest, jungle-type settings were more popular in TV shows and movies, and just a lot of people were talking about it. Part of Steven Schussler's initial goal of the restaurant was to educate people about the environment and rainforest conservation, which explains why they always have that talking tree in the store informing people about it. Obviously, it is still an important topic, but more at the front of people's minds back then. My final reason behind the decline of Rainforest Cafe is Landry's, and I know that might sound like it's a little random because they are one of the country's biggest owners of seafood restaurants that has always been making a lot of acquisitions since the 1990s. In 1994, they bought Joe's Crab Shack. In 1996, they bought the Crab House. And by far, the most applicable one here is in 2000 when they bought Rainforest Cafe for $74 million, which was a 60% premium over their fallen stock price at that point. Falling sales at each location combined with falling profits made it difficult to continue operating on their own, and they were practically forced into the deal. The existing leader at Landry became the new leader at Rainforest Cafe and made some notable changes, many of which were attempts to cut costs, which clearly they needed to do if they were going to be sustainable. In the end, Landry's actually saved the concept, but I have it on the list as part of the decline because in the process, they turned it into somewhat of a different restaurant. Without getting too specific about it, probably the biggest single change was getting rid of the birds. It might not sound that important, but it saved the company about $100,000 per location per year, and those birds were another motivation for Steven Schuessler to start the company in the first place. He said, "I'd always loved animals and tropical birds, and I wondered, what if I could create a rainforest-themed restaurant where I could share all of these amazing creatures with the public while they were eating?" He was, of course, opposed to getting rid of them because he felt like they were a big draw for a lot of the customers, and they added more realism to the experience, but in the end, I guess it may have been a necessary change. And just as a quick side note, in 2007, Steven Schuessler and Landry's joined together to create a new concept called T-Rex, a prehistoric family adventure that very much seems like a dinosaur-themed version of the Rainforest Cafe. The original one in Kansas City closed after about a decade, but there was a second one that opened in downtown Disney in Florida that still exists today. Let me know in the comments, what are your thoughts about Rainforest Cafe? Is it a unique and fun place to take the family for a tasty meal, or is it an overpriced gimmick that is best to avoid after maybe one or two visits? I'm curious to hear about any memories you might have about going there when you were younger and how the experience has changed over the years. What are your favorite parts about the atmosphere? What's your favorite menu item to get there? And any other thoughts you have about Rainforest Cafe, leave them in the comments. I'd like to hear what you have to say. Thank you for watching.